The international terminal was a wall of noise, but I felt nothing. In my hands, I gripped the battered yellow helmet that was the only piece of Connor coming home with me. I checked the family group chat, expecting a location for pickup. Instead, I found a text from my mother, Susan, sent 3 minutes ago. We cannot make it, brunch ran late, and traffic is a nightmare. Grab a lift. No condolences, no comfort. Just casual inconvenience. I stared at the screen. My husband died saving lives, and my family could not be bothered to leave their mimosas. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. The automatic doors slid open, and the humidity of the city hit me like a physical weight, mixing with the smell of jet fuel and exhaust. I stepped out onto the curb, the noise of the arrival pickup zone washing over me. Taxis honked, shuttle buses hissed, and everywhere I looked, people were colliding. Fathers dropping suitcases to lift their daughters, mothers weeping into the shoulders of sons returning from abroad, lovers bridging the distance with frantic, desperate kisses. The air vibrated with connection. And then there was me. I stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos, clutching the yellow helmet to my chest like a shield. I looked down at my phone again, reading the words from my mother. Brunch ran late. It was not a long message. It did not contain an apology. It did not contain the words, I love you or I am sorry. It contained only the logistics of their leisure. For a moment, I felt the familiar urge to make excuses for them. I wanted to tell myself that traffic really was bad, that they were just overwhelmed, that they were grieving in their own way. But then, the cold clarity of the situation settled over me. This was not a mistake. This was not a lapse in judgment. This was the trap of normalized cruelty. People often ask how a family can be this heartless, how a mother can leave her widowed daughter standing on a curb while she orders another round of drinks. It does not happen overnight. It happens by degrees. It happens when you spend a lifetime teaching them that your needs are optional. It happens when you apologize for taking up space. It happens when you let them treat your emergencies as inconveniences. Over the years, I had normalized their neglect so thoroughly that they no longer viewed my pain as a tragedy. They viewed it as a disruption to their schedule. My husband's death was simply a scheduling conflict with their brunch reservation. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the airport fade. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I was back in the disaster zone. I could hear the roar of the collapse, the shouting of the search teams, the deafening noise of the choppers lifting the wounded. In that place, strangers risked their lives for people they had never met. They screamed until their voices were raw just to let someone know they were coming. That was the noise of love. That was the noise of duty. But here, in the safety of home, the silence from my own blood was louder than any siren. I opened my eyes. Tears were a luxury for the civilians in the arrivals hall. I was still on duty. I did not type out a paragraph explaining that I was standing alone with a dead man's helmet. I did not beg them to reconsider. I did not ask them to love me. I tapped the text box and typed a single word. Understood. I hit send. It was not a surrender. It was a severance. I locked my phone and opened the rideshare app. I entered my address with steady fingers. Around me, the reunions continued, a symphony of joy that I was not invited to join. I watched a young woman run into the arms of an older man, sobbing with relief, and I realized with absolute certainty that I was an orphan. My parents were alive, my brother was alive, but I had no family. I stood by the curb, the helmet heavy in my arms, and waited for a stranger to take me home. The noise of the airport continued, but inside me, the world had gone quiet. It was the silence of a bridge burning down, the structural integrity of my family finally giving way. And in that silence, I found the strength to stand alone. Just as I clicked confirm ride, the air shattered. It was not a single siren. It was a symphony. The sound started low, a rumble in the distance that grew until it vibrated in the concrete beneath my feet. I looked up, startled, as did everyone else at the curb. Around the bend of the terminal loop, flashing lights pierced the gray afternoon. Red and blue, pulsing in a rhythm that I knew better than my own heartbeat. A massive red fire truck, gleaming and polished, rounded the corner. Then an ambulance, then another engine, then a heavy rescue vehicle. They were not racing. They were parading. They moved with a slow, solemn dignity that commanded the attention of the entire airport. The sirens were silent now, but the lights continued their dazzling, silent salute. I stepped back, confused, clutching the helmet tighter. Was there an emergency? A dignitary arriving? The lead engine pulled up directly in front of me and stopped. The air brakes hissed, a sharp exhale that cut through the murmur of the crowd. Then the doors opened. A man I recognized instantly stepped out, Chief Miller. He was older now, his face lined with the deep grooves of too many sleepless nights and too much loss. But his eyes were the same, kind, steady. He was wearing his dress uniform, the brass buttons shining. Behind him, firefighters and paramedics poured out of the vehicles, men and women in crisp uniforms, their expressions somber but proud. They did not rush. They formed two lines, creating a corridor from the curb to the lead engine. A hush fell over the pickup zone, the chaotic reunions, the shouting taxi drivers, the impatient travelers. Everyone stopped. They watched, sensing that something sacred was happening in this mundane space. Chief Miller walked up to me. He did not say a word. He simply saluted. It was sharp, precise, and filled with a respect that took my breath away. Behind him, 50 other first responders snapped to attention and saluted in unison. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I tried to salute back, but my hands were full of Connor's helmet. So I just nodded, tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. "We heard you were coming home alone, Chloe," Chief Miller said, his voice rough with emotion. "We couldn't let that happen. Connor was one of us. You are one of us." He reached out and gently took the helmet from my hands. He held it for a moment, looking down at the scratches and dents, the scars of a career spent saving others. Then he passed it to the firefighter beside him, who held it with the reverence of a holy relic. "Your carriage awaits," Miller said, gesturing to the open door of the engine. I looked at the line of trucks, the flashing lights reflecting in the glass walls of the terminal. I looked at the faces of these strangers, men and women who had left their families, their dinners, their lives, just to stand on a curb for a widow they barely knew. They did not ask why I was alone. They did not offer excuses about traffic or brunch. They simply showed up. I climbed into the truck, my legs shaking. As we pulled away, the sirens gave one short, unified blast, a roar that echoed off the terminal walls, a declaration that I was not forgotten. I looked out the window as the airport receded. I saw the travelers watching, phones raised, capturing the moment. I saw the awe on their faces, and for the first time since Connor died, I felt the weight on my chest lighten just a fraction. My blood family was 20 miles away, drinking mimosas. But my real family was right here, surrounding me in a fortress of steel and solidarity. And as we merged onto the highway, lights blazing, I knew one thing for sure. The silence was broken. The local evening news broadcast began with the usual montage of traffic reports and political soundbites, but then the anchor's voice shifted. It became somber, respectful. Tonight, a powerful tribute at the airport has captured the heart of our city. The living room was dim, illuminated only by the flicker of the television as I watched from the couch, still wearing the clothes from the flight. The footage was raw and shaky, clearly shot by a bystander's phone, but the image was unmistakable. There I was, stepping out of the fire truck, flanked by a wall of uniforms. The headline scrolled beneath, "Silent salute, first responders honor fallen hero while widow arrives alone." The anchor continued. While most of the city was enjoying the holiday weekend, hundreds of our bravest men and women paused to welcome home the widow of Connor Evans, a search and rescue specialist who died last week overseas. Then, the screen changed, and the air left the room. We dug a little deeper into the story, the anchor said, his tone sharpening. And what we found is a tale of two cities. On the left side of the screen, the footage of the silent salute played solemn, dignified, heartbreaking. On the right side, a series of social media posts appeared. They were bright, saturated, and loud. A photo of a brunch table laden with mimosas and avocado toast. A selfie of my brother Brandon grinning with sunglasses on, clinking glasses with my mother, Susan. The caption read, "Living our best life. No bad vibes today. Number family brunch." The timestamp on the post was circled in red. It was exactly 3 minutes after my flight landed. The anchor didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply let the images speak. While Chloe Evans was walking through a corridor of honor alone, her family was posting this from a bistro less than 20 miles away. We reached out to the family for comment, but have received no response. The double twist hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just that they had abandoned me, it was that the world now saw their hypocrisy side by side with my grief. The news hadn't just reported the event, they had weaponized the family's own vanity against them. I watched as the comments on the screen scrolled by, a blur of outrage. How could they? Who does that? That poor woman. My phone, which had been silent since the ride home, suddenly lit up. It wasn't a text, it was an avalanche. Notification after notification flooded the screen, buzzing so hard it vibrated across the coffee table. I didn't pick it up, I just watched it dance. My mother and brother weren't just embarrassed, they were exposed. They had spent years curating an image of a perfect, close-knit family, and in 60 seconds of airtime, that image had been incinerated by their own brunch photos. I turned off the TV. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of the high ground. I looked at Connor's helmet sitting on the mantel, still dusty, still dented. "You did this," I whispered to the empty room. "Even gone, you're still protecting me." I picked up my phone, not to answer the flood of calls from my mother, but to turn it off completely. I didn't need to hear their excuses. I didn't need to hear them panic because their reputation was bleeding out on live TV. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, my mother was probably screaming at my brother to delete the post. Somewhere, Brandon was trying to spin a narrative that made him the victim. But it didn't matter. The truth was out, stamped with a timestamp and broadcast in high definition. They had chosen brunch over a funeral. And now, the world knew exactly who they were. The silence of the apartment was shattered, not by sirens, but by the relentless vibration of my phone. It buzzed across the coffee table like an angry insect. I watched the screen light up with names that used to mean safety. Mom. Brandon. Mom. Mom. Brandon! Finally, the buzzing stopped, replaced by the blinking notification light. Then, the voicemails began to stack up. I pressed play on the first one. My mother's voice was high, tight, bordering on hysterical. "Chloe, pick up the phone! Do you have any idea what you've done? People are commenting on my Facebook page saying terrible things. They think we abandoned you. You need to post something right now explaining that it was a miscommunication. Tell them we offered to get you later." No sorrow, no concern for how I was coping with the funeral, just panic about her Facebook comments. I played the next one. Brandon. His voice was defensive, aggressive. "Nice stunt, Chloe. You could have told us there were cameras. You set us up to look like villains. Now my boss is asking questions because someone tagged the company in that news clip. Fix this." I sat back, the familiar weight of their narcissism settling over me. They weren't sorry they missed the pickup. They were sorry they got caught. For years, I had absorbed their selfishness, metabolizing it into forgiveness because I thought that's what family did. I thought love meant being a sponge for other people's flaws. But listening to their voices now, so frantic, so self-absorbed, I felt something snap. Not a break, but a release. The tether that had bound me to their approval for 29 years simply dissolved. Returning their calls was never an option. You don't negotiate with a spreading infection. I picked up my laptop and opened a new email. The recipient was David Stern, a family law attorney who had worked with Connor on estate planning. The subject line, Connor Evans, life insurance and estate execution. I typed quickly, my fingers flying over the keys. "David, please proceed with the immediate execution of Connor's will." As the sole beneficiary, I am directing the full payout of his life insurance policy, $120,000, to be used as the founding capital for a new 501c nonprofit organization. I paused, thinking of the name. I looked at the helmet on the mantle. I thought of the convoy, the flashing lights, the people who stood watch when no one else would. Organization name Connor's Watch, to provide immediate logistical and financial support for families of fallen first responders and military personnel. I hit send. It was a professional escalation. While my mother was fighting a comment war on Facebook and my brother was trying to scrub his social media history, I was building a fortress. I knew they were expecting a cut of that insurance money. I knew Brandon had debts, and my mother had expensive tastes. They assumed that because I was grieving, I would be pliable. They assumed I would share. But grief had clarified my vision. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I was a CEO of my own life. The next morning, I woke up early. I didn't check my personal messages. I went straight to the lawyer's office to sign the incorporation papers. Sitting in that leather chair, signing my name next to the donation amount, I felt a surge of power. $120,000. It could have paid off my student loans. It could have been a down payment on a house, but giving it away felt better. It felt like buying my freedom. By noon, Connor's Watch was a legal entity. I had a tax ID number, a mission statement, and a bank account with a zero balance because every penny was already committed to the cause. I walked out of the law firm into the bright sunlight of downtown. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Brandon. We're coming over. We need to settle some things regarding Connor's estate. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that felt new on my face. Let them come. They were walking into a room where they thought they held the cards, unaware that I had already burned the deck. The game had changed, and they were still playing by the old rules, the ones where I was the quiet, accommodating daughter who would do anything to keep the peace. Those rules died with Connor. The knock on the door was not a request. It was a demand. It was the heavy, entitled thud of people who believed they owned the space on the other side. I checked the peephole. Susan and Brandon stood in the hallway, looking impatient. My mother was checking her reflection in the glass of a framed print in the corridor, smoothing her hair. Brandon was typing furiously on his phone. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. I did not step back to let them in immediately. I stood in the frame, blocking their path, just long enough to establish that they were guests, and unwelcome ones at that. Chloe, my mother said, breathless, pushing past me. We have been so worried. You haven't answered a single call. I have been busy, I said, closing the door behind them. They walked into the living room, their eyes scanning the space. I knew what they were looking for. They were looking for signs of instability, signs of a breakdown, anything that would validate their narrative that I was acting out of grief and needed management. But the apartment was spotless. There were no piles of tissues, no empty wine bottles, just boxes of supplies for the foundation stacked neatly in the corner. Brandon didn't waste time with pleasantries. He sat on the edge of the sofa, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. Look, we know you're upset about the airport thing. It was a mess, but we need to be practical now. Dad's estate attorney called Mom. He said you requested the payout. I did, I said, remaining standing. That is a lot of money, Chloe, Susan said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. $120,000. You are not in the right headspace to handle that kind of cash. We think it's best if we put it into a family trust. For safekeeping, until you're better. There it was, the pivot. They didn't care about the news clip anymore. They cared about the liquidity. They assumed that because I was a widow, I was vulnerable. They assumed that the money was a pie to be sliced, and they had brought their own plates. I retrieved the blue folder from the kitchen counter. It felt heavy, not with paper, but with consequence. I walked back and dropped it onto the coffee table in front of them. It landed with a heavy final slap. I agree, I said calmly. I didn't want the money sitting around. Brandon grabbed the folder, his eyes lighting up. He flipped it open, expecting a check or a deposit slip. He froze. He wasn't looking at a bank statement. He was looking at the articles of incorporation for Connor's Watch. He flipped the page. There, highlighted in yellow, was the initial capital deposit, $120,000. What is this? Brandon asked, his voice shaking. It is a donation, I said. Every cent of Connor's life insurance. It is gone. It belongs to the foundation now. You gave it away? Susan shrieked, standing up. All of it? Are you insane? That was family money. It was Connor's money, I corrected. And now it is going to people who actually show up. They stared at me, their faces contorted in a mix of horror and greed. They looked small. For years, I had thought revenge meant making them hurt the way I hurt. But looking at them now, panic rising in their eyes because they couldn't access a dead man's money, I realized true justice wasn't about destruction, it was about creation. I was a seed planter. By giving that money away, I hadn't just burned a bridge. I had built a landscape they couldn't survive in. I had taken the resource they valued most, money, and transformed it into the thing they lacked most, integrity. I wasn't destroying them, I was rendering them irrelevant. Their greed could not consume a legacy that was already growing roots in the community. "There is nothing here for you," I said, my voice devoid of anger. "The money is gone. The daughter you ignored is gone. And your brunch reservation is waiting." Brandon threw the folder back on the table. He looked at me with pure hatred, but he knew he was beaten. There was no legal recourse. I had outmaneuvered them with charity. "Let's go," he spat at our mother. They walked out, leaving the door open behind them. I walked over and closed it, locking the deadbolt one last time. The room was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the promise of what that money would do. I had checkmated them, not with a weapon, but with a gift. The first gala for Connor's watch was held in the grand ballroom of the city's oldest hotel, a space donated by the owner, whose father had been a firefighter. The room was filled not with socialites or influencers, but with uniforms. Police officers, EMTs, firefighters, and search and rescue teams mingled with volunteers wearing the foundation's logo. It was a sea of navy, black, and reflective yellow. I stood at the podium, looking out at them. The noise of the crowd faded as I leaned into the microphone. 6 months ago, I landed at an airport alone. I thought silence was the sound of abandonment. But tonight, looking at all of you, I realized silence is just the pause before the sirens start. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't polite applause. It was the heavy, rhythmic clapping of people who understood duty. I walked through the crowd afterward, shaking hands, hearing stories. A young paramedic told me how a grant from the foundation had paid for her childcare while she recovered from an injury. A widow hugged me, whispering that the care team had saved her sanity during the first week of grief. In the lobby, near the entrance, hung a small frame. Inside was a personal check for $600, signed by Brandon Evans. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "Donated by those who taught us that presence is priceless." It was petty, perhaps, but it was also true. Brandon had sent it a month ago, a desperate attempt to buy back some semblance of dignity after his friends started uninviting him to events. I hadn't cashed it, I had framed it. It was a reminder that some debts can never be paid with money. I stepped out onto the hotel balcony for a moment of quiet. The city lights stretched out before me, a grid of connections. I thought about my family, fading into the background of my life like static on a radio. I didn't hate them anymore. I just didn't need them. I had traded a hollow family for a real one. I had traded silence for a siren song of support. "Chloe?" I turned. Chief Miller was standing there, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed me one. "To Connor," he said. "To Connor," I replied, clinking my glass against his. We stood there, watching the city breathe. I wasn't alone. I wasn't waiting for a ride. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, surrounded by the people who showed up when it mattered. And as I took a sip of champagne, I realized the most important truth of all. You don't find your family, you build it. If this story moved you, please share it. Let's remind the world that family isn't just about blood, it's about who stands with you in the storm.